Well, welcome back to Distilled Church Finance Made Simple. This is a part 2 in a 3-part series with Jim Sheppard from Generis and our very own Dustin Alexander. They'll be talking about why having a CFO could really benefit your church and help you to truly keep every dollar on mission. If you haven't watched episode 1, I highly recommend you pause this and take a listen to that first. All right, let's jump in and hear what Jim and Dustin have to say.
So when we talk about these various roles and staffing being an issue, so many growing churches either can't afford a full-time executive. There's perils involved with bringing in executive level leadership that, let's be honest, if you've been in the church world, you can either get somebody who's not as qualified as what they had purported themselves to be, and you've invested moving expenses, you've invested healthcare, families, and they've come to know your church. And in the church world, it's not the same. The comings and goings of staff is not the same as in the corporate world. We understand that there's a relational aspect that is much more difficult. So a church might be reticent to bring in kind of these kind of leaders. If a church needs a high level foresight, how should a pastor approach something like fractional staffing? And in particular, we're talking about maybe fractional CFO.
Yeah. So let's start even below that level. And I'm not saying this because I'm on your podcast. I am on record as having said this on my podcast. I don't believe, and I'm not throwing shade at those who do keep their own books. I don't believe that a church ought to keep its own books until it gets above $3 million in income. And I could even make a case beyond that. If you are $3 million and less, better off to hire someone to keep your books for you. And here's why. For the reason you just stated, we'll talk about that in a CFO role in a second, is the person that you're going to hire most likely is not as qualified as the person in this outsourced company who's going to be carrying, keeping your books. That's number one. Number two, these outsourced companies like yours have a frame of reference that includes a lot of churches. And so they can benchmark your finances against others and tell you when you might be running into trouble. And then third thing is, most of these people who work in the local church don't even know the correct reports to run. And those of you out here who do these services, you know the right reports and you get them done timely and in a way that gets to the church. That certainly sounds like an infomercial for you guys. It's not intended to be that. It's Jim's perspective on what would be best for the church.
And we want to be that for the church. So
Exactly.
Business.
And then the CFO, see, here's the thing about the fractional CFO role is you have to be a certain size church, and it would be a good bit larger than $3 million to be able to pay the right person, a qualified, true CFO type person. So you'd have to be a good bit larger than that. And yet churches that size need a CFO, could benefit from the services of a CFO. And that's why a fractional person is, I think, beneficial, because you get the advantage of someone who's overseeing the architecture of your finances, someone who has the benefit of working with more than one church. So they're providing the service for your church, but they have the benefit of seeing a lot of churches, not unlike us, Dustin. Part of what we get paid for. A lot of people, I go in sometimes and people think the stuff that I show them is brilliant. It's not brilliant. I've seen it somewhere else, right? And I just get to pay attention like, well, hey, I've seen 10 churches doing it the wrong way. So it's not really hard for me to figure out what the right way might look like. That's not that hard. And that's what you get when you outsource to a fractional CFO or even a fractional CMO. I know it's not what you guys do, but I love the idea of a fractional, chief marketing officer to run your communications and do the other things and help you to oversee your social media and all of your internal strategy and everything. Those are roles that you probably can't afford until you're a much larger church. But in a fractional sense, if you had that role, it would be a great benefit to your team and particularly to your board and your senior pastor in looking down the road and saying, okay, where's God taking our church? And are we in a position financially that we could actually pull that off?
Yeah. And I'm with you. I'm a huge fan of fractional staffing in churches where you can. It's a great way to leverage expertise. And like you said, those people are working with 10, 20, 30 different churches, and you get the benefit of
That's right.
everything that they learn in those contexts, and they bring back and they apply it to your context, along with the reduced payroll benefit that allows you to do things in a more healthy way. And so we talked a little bit about, you mentioned some of the things you've seen in the way of healthy, unhealthy finances and kind of some financial landmines. And so we're talking about where this missing role in the church, where does it become most obvious? What are some of the top one or two financial landmines that you see, along with like cash? You mentioned cash reserves. So what is it that you see when a church lacks the long-term objective financial architect? What are some of these landmines and some of these pitfalls that you've kind of experienced?
Yeah. So I've already alluded to two of them. So let's talk about those two: payroll, or your salary expenses, your people expenses, and then your building expenses, especially when you have mortgage on your book. Now, just for the record, I'm not opposed to mortgage financing. I just think mortgage financing ought not to cause you a problem long term. You can't borrow too much money and think you're going to get away with it, because at some point it's going to become an issue. And people ask me, they said, well, Jim, how much money is too much money? How much money is too much to borrow? Well, I just like the first time you say to yourself, you're looking at your financial statements and you're a little thin on the margin for your expenses and income. And you're like, gosh, if we didn't have that mortgage and have to pay all that money to the bank, we could. Well, the first time you say that, it means you borrowed too much money, because you don't have enough margin there, right? So people will ask me things like, Dustin, this is one of my favorite questions. Hey, so our percentage of payroll to income is about 49%. Excuse me. And I was like, is that good? And I was like, I don't know. And they said, well, you do this all the time. You look at financial statements all the time. You see, is that good? Well, I don't know. I see people at 42% and I see people at 58%. And, I've seen it when 56% is okay. And I've seen it when 42% is a problem. And they're like, what do you mean? So it's the combination of that and what it takes to do your buildings. So if you're running 44% for your people, and then you have another, let's just say 40% that's devoted to buildings, including mortgage, you've now got 84 cents on the dollar that is committed every month before you do a thing. And I'm not saying you can't run your church, the rest of your church, on 16 cents on the dollar. I'm just going to tell you, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge, right? So, but if you had, for example, if you had 58% of your budget was people, and let's just say 17% of your budget was buildings, that's 75%. There wouldn't be anything wrong with that, right? The other thing too is 58%. I would ask you, are you a simple church or are you a complicated church, right? So simple church would be the old Tom Rainier model of we're basically Sunday focused. We're weekend focused. We don't do a lot of stuff. You wouldn't need as much staff for that. So if you were a simple church model with 58% going to staff, I'd be like, that feels overstaffed to me. By the same token, if you were very heavy discipleship, very heavy during the week focused, very small group focused, and you were a more complex church, 56 to 58% might not be an unreasonable thing. It's those questions that a CFO is responsible to answer that you would not expect a director of finance or a controller to ask. They're merely presenting you with the financial statements. That's what they're doing. And the CFO is saying, wait, I think we've got a problem here. We've got, my way of looking at financial statements, Dustin, is always just be really simple. I think like the traffic light down in town. It's either a green light, a yellow light, or a red light. You're okay in the green zone. You need to pay attention in the yellow zone. You're headed for trouble in the red zone. And that's what I generally look for in the combination of what are these expenses that are going to cause you an issue down the road, including, most notably people and buildings.
Yeah. And it sounds like, from your description and everything with the CFO role, having that person in place before you get that mortgage, before you build that new sanctuary, to be able to tell you how much it becomes even more critical to say, hey, listen, we can only afford a $3 million building. And that's, we don't need to
Yeah.
build a $13 million edifice. We need to, if we do, this is going to be the ramifications of it. And so I think that, from kind of pulling what you're saying, that's the role of the CFO when it comes to budgeting and forecasting.
Yeah. Yeah. And see, here's the thing. So somebody might be watching right now and it's like, well, Jim, that's all well and good, but where's the board's role in the midst of all of this? And I'm not saying your board wouldn't be on top of these issues, but most of them aren't, including boards that have very smart financial people on them, because they're not able to translate what they see over here in the marketplace over here into the church world and make it make sense. And And most of them are not as truly objective as they need to be. They tend to say yes to whatever it is the pastor is wanting to do. That's a bit of a problem. I'm not saying, I'm not throwing rocks at somebody. I'm just like, hey, man, if you're bored, whatever your polity looks like, if everybody on your board is a green light to everything you're doing, Pastor, you don't probably have true accountability and board oversight like what you need. You need people who are blinking the yellow light and the red light every now and then, just as a means of making sure that you're being prudent, that you're being prayerful, that you're being careful about where you're taking your church down the road. Because the problem with the mortgage is you can't reverse yourself out of it. You can't just wake up tomorrow morning and like, oh, I'm just going to. No, you're stuck with it. It has long-term implications for what you're doing. And that's where I think the CFO role helps you to try to figure out, is this really the best thing for us?